Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this interview on Doing Sociology. Today, we have with us Dr. Fritzi Marie Tiedemann, who works at the Gender and Media Studies for the South Asian region, Humboldt University, Berlin. Her research focuses on gender, media, and social change in contemporary India. She has published on the Indian online matrimonial market, family, sexuality, social activism, and media representations. We welcome you, Dr. Tiedemann, to this interview, and thank you for taking time out to do this.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's begin the interview by talking about new media as a field of research. And what do you think are the opportunities of studying different forms of new media, particularly with reference to your work in India?
Yes, so I began my work on new media with regard to India in 2008 with the study of the then quite new phenomenon of matrimonial websites in India. And back then I was intrigued by the fact that like age-old practices, what is matchmaking, was subject to a development, what we call mediatization in media studies. So there's this increasing influence of communication media into various social and cultural spheres. So, or we can also say it's like a permeation of media into actually all levels of life, of work, entertainment, and private sphere. So there's this interrelation of medialization and social change, which enables access to information and technology for more people, which I found very interesting at the example of matrimonial media. But you can also see other examples, like for instance, studies on the mobile phone revolution across the world, and particularly in the global South. This is also a very interesting field. And I have also done work on television advertising, which is not really new media, but I studied, for example, how these are perceived through comments posted on the internet under the YouTube uploads, for example, and you can see like how the same media production is perceived in very different ways by different people. And in my current project, I look at ways in which solidarity is generated and circulated via media, and particularly new media, in the context of current protest movements in India, or very recent protest movements now. So I look at practices of building emotional ties, of creating counter narratives, and of mobilizing via new media. So this is basically the fields that I'm covering, and also the opportunities that I see in studying new forms of new media.
Right. So our next question to you is on the matrimonial advertisements and websites. How do you see them, or how can they be seen and understood as media texts?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. And I mean, first of all, matrimonial media offer these users' profiles, which are very, very rich data, I would say. I mean, this is also one of the reasons I was intrigued in, going into this. Actually, I was an MA student when I started working on my MA thesis on matrimonial media, and then I continued throughout my PhD to deal with this subject. So it's a very rich source of data, which tells us a lot about self-representation of individuals and offers insights into very dynamic processes and social categories such as class, caste, religion, and also discourses on modernity and tradition or gendered identities. It's I mean, in my research, I dealt a lot with this, first of all, with the structure and also with the categories that are integrated into these websites, into the forms that they ask you to fill out, but also with the text that is written into a free text field, which was very interesting. So you learn a lot about changing values and aspirations of young Indian men and women. And I would say that these are media texts in a way that is very similar to social networking sites. So there's this difference between users and producers blurs. So they become users and producers at the same time. There's a term that is called producage or producers, which merges these two processes in media production and media reception, because the people, they produce their own profile text, but they also interact with others, and they also consume texts from the same site. So there's this, it's a very dynamic process. And although the structure, as I've already mentioned, is provided by the platforms and therefore includes certain affordances, like, for example, the categories and the information that users are asked to enter and to self-identify with, they still leave room for open interpretation or a creative dealing with these, with this structure.
In your article on the matrimonial market in India, you look at the relationship between images and their ideological implications. So could you talk a little bit about how the proliferation of forms of new media like the internet impacts social processes like matchmaking?
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, this was one also of the core questions that go through my research. What is so new about new media? We call it new media. And I found it interesting that the idea of a network of references that is central to matchmaking practices in India, but more or less everywhere in the world, it's the functioning of matrimonial media borrows from this idea, which is a non-digital idea. It, as I already mentioned, they work very similar to social networking sites, but they have this specific aim of finding a partner. And they are also a little bit different than dating websites because they are focused on this matrimonial union and not on just finding a nice person. So, but they avail of the same principles that family networks or even caste networks and association have used for centuries. So of this, finding similarities and finding matching social and religious categories. But, and this is maybe the new aspect, they are extended and made more flexible, I would say, by technology. So there's more personal information, there's more functionings for interaction and more space for photographs and for additional information. So given this, I would actually situate them within these already mentioned processes of overall mediatization and also of increasing connectivity. And you can add to this all the other new media that people use, like the mobile phone, like messengers, etc. Because from the website, it quickly goes to other platforms and media-based communication technologies. So yeah, maybe one can say that these new technologies allow for more interaction between individuals and for young people also to create their own profiles. In my study, I found that around 50% wrote their own profiles and the other half was written by others, like family members or friends. But my studies, my data was more than 10 years ago. So I would suppose I didn't do an update that the percentage has shifted a bit towards more people creating their own profiles, because this was a tendency that I observed back then. And you mentioned images and ideological implications. So it's interesting because matrimonial websites from the very beginning actually have developed tailor-made PR strategies to reach potential customers and also certain sections of the society. So many websites have, target niches, or they target a broader audience, but then they offer subsites. So, and in these PR strategies, they employ a visual language that almost always conveys like a healthy blend of modernity and tradition. And this is seen in the mix of clothes, like traditional clothes, for example, with technological devices such as laptops that are associated with modernity and development. Or you can filter this through statements that are published of people who are then again shown in their photographs dressed in Western business attire, but they talk about how their family found the perfect match. So you always have these seemingly contradictory representations of people. And some websites also advertise without any hesitation their specialization in intra-caste matchmaking. So you find the whole range of what you also find in the non-digital sphere, right? So I would not really detect a revolutionary change here. I would more speak of a mediatization of existing patterns and developments and an opening up of more avenues of matchmaking, or you can also say a diversification of strategies.
Right. So next question is kind of, related, that do you see that ideas of Indianness or regionalism, caste and gender get reproduced in these matrimonial advertisements and websites? If it would be possible for you to share some examples that you came across.
Yes, I actually found this a very strong tendency. Also given the fact that many of these websites, at least initially, catered to an NRI audience, they were very strong in their ambition to show how Indian they are and how Indian the whole process is. So in my work, I've shown that the whole idea of dating websites has been taken and transformed by the Indian market by including features which seem to be typically Indian, which is very stereotypical, but this is how these websites work. Like, and these features are religion, caste, but also something like astrology, for example. So this is one thing. And this Indianness that is projected is in connecting to what I said earlier, a form of global Indianness. So being global and local and modern and traditional at the same time. So like an Indian, ideally Indian man or woman. And I found that the gendered images are very stereotypical, and that there's more images of women actually. And so you have this ideal Indian woman or the new Indian woman. It's like a concept that has been referred to in media studies since the 80s, because it's a concept that occurs in television, advertising, film, etc. And it's this image, like a woman that she's maybe working, she's traveling, she has adventurous outdoor hobbies, but she's at the same time very obedient to elders in her family and respects traditions, whatever this means. But this is the image that is conveyed. And for example, in my study of matrimonial profiles, I found that many women present themselves as assertive or confident, but also emphasize their connection to traditional values, and refer very often to family values, or also mention respect for elders. And then there's also this constant attempt to bring together ambitions to have a career and a family life. And many also use the term simple girl. I'm a simple girl, which is also something that is very, that is related to gendered norms, like women as expected to be simple, obedient, calm, maybe not speaking up. So it's a term that I found throughout these profiles, and that is for them positively connoted, but also conveys a certain image. And then there's these true stories or testimonies that are published by many websites, and they again mediate conceptions of ideal relationships and without discrediting traditional channels of marriage and arrangement. So you have images of hugging couples that symbolize the idea of, or the ideal of companionate marriage and mutual understanding. And then you have a quote that tells us on how the parents found the partner and how everybody agreed and followed all the steps that are expected. And you have photographs of couples performing religious rituals in regional wedding costumes. Very regional identity is very stereotypically depicted, often with clothes that people would wear only in certain festivals, but not in daily life. And so they reinforce also tradition and community as key components, and also as key filter criteria in the matchmaking process. So, and another example would be for the stereotypical depiction of women that I've already mentioned, which is also organized along communal lines. You can say you have subsites in many websites that are organized along linguistic barriers. So you have Hindi and Urdu and etc. But I found that especially for the Hindi and Urdu subsites, they are also assigned to Hindu and Muslim. You can find, I mean, you see that in the images being used, like the women that are portrayed and that wear certain dresses. Yeah. So you have this regional and religious identity, which is very stereotypical, and it's very clear who is addressed and also what images of Indianness. I mean, they vary, right? You also have certain websites that, there was one website, I don't know if it exists anymore, simplymarried.com. They said they are a matrimonial website. So they specifically cater to an urban, globally oriented audience. Of course, they had different images than websites that cater to caste specific clients. So, and then there's this question of caste, which we can never really leave aside, and it is an integral feature of all websites as a filter criteria, and it's you find caste and subcaste according to the understanding of Varna and Jati, but you find also a menu of subcastes that are organized along the denominations of non-Hindu religions, like Sunni and Shia, Catholic and Protestant. So they are also often summarized under the category of caste. So users are not like forced to enter these, but these are again these affordances that I spoke of. They are requested to, or they're invited to enter this information. And many do enter this information, even, like, as I mentioned, non-Hindus. And during interviews, I asked people why they did this, whether caste is an important criterion for them. And they said, no, not really, but you know, the pool of people is so large. So it's another factor that could limit the pool of potential candidates. So it's almost subconsciously that these boundaries are reinforced, and by people, you know, by people people obey or go along with these affordances, and they reproduce something, even though for them it's maybe not so important. And yeah, so these are some of the aspects that I observed and that I would say are rather particular to the Indian or even the global Indian market, not only the market in India itself, but including also the non-resident Indian populations. So there are many ways in which these socio-religious categories are reinscribed, as I said, by design and marketing strategies, and also by users. And then there's another strand that it would be too long to talk in length about this, but which includes the whole PR again, or the small advertising films that have been produced. And there's so many references to, you have to be a good Indian, you have to marry within your community. And what is community is not always very clear, whether community is the whole Indian population, or which is a certain religion or a certain class or a certain caste. So this is often left open, but there's this reference to heterogyny, yeah? to marrying inside your group. So yeah, so these would be basically some of the features that I would argue produce a certain image of Indianness, which is not fixed, but it has this continuum of aspects.
Right. So our last question is about the role of youth, and how do you think they shape these ideas in society? Because marriage is primarily talking about a young population, and India has also been known for its demographic dividend in favor of young people. So how do you see their role in this entire context?
I mean, first of all, youth were like my prime interlocutors in all my studies. Even now, I mean, right now I'm not working on matrimonial media anymore, but even when I look at protest movements, for example, these are majorly youth driving these movements, although I have to say, no generation is solely responsible for shaping ideas. No? It's always a dynamic and intergenerational process everywhere. And I think particularly in South Asia, where social spaces are not so divided along age, I found, because you have larger intergenerational households as compared, for example, to Europe. And I've also found that the spaces of life are not so divided, like there's more coexistence in many ways. But nevertheless, I mean, I already talked about this dialectical relationship between social practices and media representations. And I think young people are also the ones, or the first ones, to use new technologies. So in many cases, the people I interviewed who were between their mid-20s and mid-30s, because some were already married also, but they were often the ones teaching their parents or older relatives how these technologies worked, so their parents could use websites in order to look for prospective grooms or brides. So there's also an intergenerational process of learning. And as I looked also on these promotional images of young women, especially, but also couples, they visually represent the at times very starkly conflicting individual desires and social expectations that are tied to the process of partner selection in contemporary India. And you have a reflection of social practices in these promotional images, and also like a vision of what would be the ideal way, but imagined by capitalist companies or market platforms, right? So it's you also have to see the images against the background of what works in the market. So it's not a mirror one-to-one of how things develop on the ground. But yeah, so there's this reflection of certain processes that are happening, and this reflections also can also be found in the individual profiles that I looked at. And I feel that it's no surprise that a tendency that I noted in spouse selection was often described by informants as family-oriented individualism. So you have, like, it's maybe a specific form of a tendency that we have all around the world towards more individualistic practices, which is but not one way, and there are many ways to develop an individual stance. And I found it's still very, very important for the young generation to not have this break with the older generation. So to be in a friendly and in a positive relationship with each other, because also, I mean, everywhere people depend on each other in a way, and maybe here in Germany, people depend on elders because they pay for the pension that they will later receive, but we also depend on elders for childcare, for support, for motivation, for inspiration. I mean, there's so many ways in which younger and older people are important to each other. So I don't know if this really answers your question. I have many thoughts on this because it's very interesting, and you're right that India is a very, very young nation and also a very numerous population. So there's a very youthful force, and this is also something that is really different from the West, where the politics and also the streets are more dominated by older people, actually. And we also more have this problem of an aging population. So it will be interesting also to observe it further, how in the next 1 and 2 or 2 decades, this young generation influences politics, media development, social change. It's hard to say really in which direction it will in the end go.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Tijman, for talking to us today. Despite the increasing number of cases globally, I think all of us are caught in amidst the third wave everywhere. You've taken time out and spoken to us on this January morning. So thank you once again. And it's been extremely engaging listening to you. So thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really, I'm very happy also that you asked for this interview, because for me, because I'm working on India, sitting at least at the moment in Germany. And for me, this actually is the most important way of interaction, because I've been traveling a lot to India in the past, but now it's actually not possible. And it's strange for me to not share my ideas with an Indian audience, with people working in the Indian academia, because I feel this is the most relevant exchange for me, at least. And I mean, I also have this task of, talking in the West about developments that are, not happening in the global North, which I feel it's similarly an important task. But yeah, I'm really glad to be able to contribute also to this beautiful endeavor of the Doing Sociology blog and project.
Thank you once again for those very kind words.